So, welcome everybody. We're here with Ralph Ellis today on the Megalithomania YouTube channel, our video podcast. Now, Ralph spoke at Megalithomania a couple of years ago, and he did a lecture about the megaliths and ancient sites of the Bible lands, including Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, and others. So, we're going to get into some things regarding Egypt today, specifically, but also we're going to be looking at metrology, the links with sites such as Avebury and Stonehenge, and other things like this, and also some of the secrets in ancient Egypt you may not have heard about. Now, Ralph's been studying biblical chronology and ancient Egypt for 30 years. He's released a number of books. His latest is called Shards of Illumination, and one of his classics is Thoth, Architect of the Universe. I actually have the old version here and the new version. And so we've got it's a great book. I read it many years ago, almost soon after it came out, actually. And it really gets into this idea of this ancient global system, like these sites almost like represent maps, and they encode all this metrology and these other elements which absolutely fascinate me and should fascinate any megalithomaniacs. So we're going to start talking about that today before we get into the whole Egyptian story. So how are you doing, Ralph? Great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be with you, Hugh. And looking forward to the trip. Sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things about the trip, I think, which is that we've got the private access to the Assyrian, and the Serapeum is now open as well. And I understand that they may have been closed last time you were there. So what?
Yes.
So I mean, these are two of the highlights of the trip, really. But what before we get into the official kind of questions we've got lined up, what got you fascinated by ancient Egypt in the first place?
Yeah, I actually started on the biblical research first. So I've been doing the biblical research ever since I was a kid. So ever since age 14. I didn't really get into the Egyptian side of it until sort of in the early 90s, when some of these more esoteric books were coming out about Egypt. And so I decided to start looking at sites in Britain, megaliths in Britain, simply because it was difficult for me to get to Egypt at that time. And I did quite a lot of research into the British megaliths. And then, of course, once you've done that, you've got to go to Egypt, to have a look at what is over there. So I did several trips. I think I've been there 4 or 5 times now to Egypt. And the more I started researching and writing, the more I needed to go back to Egypt to investigate all the various sites that I needed to look at, both for the megaliths and also for the religious work that I've been doing, because of course, people like Akhenaten, central to my story on the religious side of it. Well, you've got to go and see where Akhenaten was. So I did Central Egypt, where he was down at Amarna, which not many people do because it's very difficult to get to down there at Elmina. And I had to have an army personnel carrier to take me down there because you've got to be protected at that time as well. So that was all fun. And then doing the trip up to Tanis, which I understand you've done a lot at Tanis as well. Not many people get to Tanis, so that was very interesting, a very enigmatic site there up at Tanis. So yeah, Egypt was central to my first book, actually, because that Thoth book was the first book I ever released, actually. That was back in 97, I think it was. So 25 years ago now, it's getting on. Looking at the megaliths of Egypt, but of course starting with the British megaliths, so starting at Avebury and Stonehenge, because I got the impression, and I still have the impression, that they're all linked together. So with this megalithic era that we see all across the world, although I haven't done so much in the Central and South American megaliths, but they're all linked in some fashion. And one imagines that megalithic era was a specific era at some point in the past, and all of these megaliths were created at that particular time. And that's what I was writing about in Thoth, because I found elements of let's start with the British megaliths, that indicated there was a bit of a sort of worldwide plan about this, that they were trying to encode, you might say secrets, but basically knowledge, the knowledge they had of the world and the cosmos at that particular time, which is far above what they're given credit for now within modern academia. And I don't know if you want to carry on now straight into Avebury, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's start talking about Avebury, because that's one of the things I actually really noticed about when I read Thoth, Architect of the Universe. So we're going to bring up a couple of slides now. So Ralph can.
So if we have a look at the Avebury image that has the Earth attached to it, and we can have a look at a comparison between the two, because you have this great henge, which is 0.5 kilometer across, so it's quite large, with a number of megaliths around in a big circle. And you've got to sort of ask yourself, what is this representing? You know, people glibly say it's a temple or whatever. But what's it representing? There we are. It's now nicely in focus. Well, let's look at it in plan view as it is here. And what we have is a large circle with a definite sort of equator across the middle, and sort of a sort of north pole and a sort of south pole to it. And it's leaning at 22.5 degrees from due north. So it's sort of skewed to the left a little bit. And I was sitting there pondering this particular image and thinking, what were they trying to do? You know, if they were sending any messages to the future via their great megaliths, then what were they encoding? What is this picture? And then it struck me that this is planet Earth floating in space. And so we have the equator going across the center. We have the axis of the Earth, and it's inclined, of course, with obliquity. It's inclined at, well, now it's 23.5 degrees from the vertical, from the plane of the ecliptic. And Avebury does exactly the same. And is this what they were encoding? That they knew the form and shape of the Earth, they knew the heliocentric model of the solar system, etc., etc. Information, knowledge that's well in advance of what we would give them credit for nowadays. And the proof of this was the other aspects on this map. So I haven't drawn it all here because I'm keeping some of that back for anyone who wants to read the book, or for when we go on the trip, of course, and we can talk about this in more detail. But in the northern hemisphere of the Avebury Earth, you can see this little cove shape within a circle. So there's a circle of megaliths, and then this cove, this trilithon, I suppose, of large stones forming this sort of C shape pointing out towards the northeast. And it just struck me that that sort of shape was very, very similar to the main sarsen stones we see at Stonehenge. So that forms a C shape as well at Stonehenge, pointing out towards the northeast, exactly the same as this does. Yeah, here we are. We can see the image of Stonehenge from above, and not looking at the sarsen circle, which you see there, but it's more difficult to see. But inside the sarsen circle, you'll see a sort of C shape, a sort of half an ellipse, and that's the element that I was thinking is encoded into the Avebury circle. And so it's sort of marking Stonehenge on the Avebury Earth. And if you count up the number of stones that go around that particular C shape at Avebury, you end up with 26 stones. And if you double that, you get 252, which is the latitude of Stonehenge in Wiltshire. So it's like it's encoding the actual latitude of Stonehenge within the Avebury Circle, as if they knew how to divide up the Earth into latitude and longitude. And that was proven. I've not shown it on the diagram, but there's another circle inside the Avebury Henge in the southern hemisphere, as it were. And that equates to another artifact on the face of the Earth down in the southern hemisphere. And that's very interesting because, of course, that's indicating that whoever designed Avebury not only knew the form and shape of the Earth and knew where Stonehenge was in the northern hemisphere, but they also knew of a specific artifact down in the southern hemisphere as well, and marked it with the correct line of latitude as well.
That is very, very interesting. It's good to get this update. I mean, one of the things that one of our inspirations for megalithomania is obviously the work of John Michel. And as you mentioned this idea that it's like marking its own latitude. And I think it was John. I think it was John that actually found that the exact latitude of Avebury is 360 divided by 7, and then the latitude jumps out. So clearly Avebury is 1/7 of the way around the planet.
Yes, if you look on that diagram that you've got up there, you'll see next to the red marker, it gives the latitude north, and it says 52, 25, 45, I think it is, or 40, 48. So 51 degrees, 25 minutes. And 45 seconds it is. And if you do 360 divided by 7, that is exactly the latitude of Avebury. And it puts it in the pub car park. And I don't know if you've been to Avebury, people listening, but in the center of the henge, there is a pub there. And that latitude puts you in the pub car park in the center of Avebury. So it's pretty accurate.
That is fascinating. So basically, just to point out the most important part of Avebury is the pub. I think even the ancients saw that coming. That is very impressive.
It's probably been there for 5,000 years.
So this geodesy, this kind of layout of the way these sites are on the planet is unbelievable, really. I mean, you've done work obviously relating to the Giza Plateau as well, and how that fits in with the kind of systems that you were covering. Just before we zoom over there, if we just have a look at that Stonehenge image again as well, the Stonehenge, the Stonehenge image with that one. And you'll see there's a henge around Stonehenge as well. So we have the Stonehenge in the middle, but then we have an earthwork henge around the perimeter. And inside that earthen henge, you'll see 2 round, smaller ditch ring systems. And they are interesting as well because they equate exactly with the precession of the equinox of the Earth. And so if we go on to the image of Stonehenge and the Earth together, that one, you will see that on the right-hand side, we have the real Earth, and the Earth precesses like a gyroscope, and it forms a circle to the north and to the south of the axis of the Earth. And you can see the circles. I've drawn them in there on the right-hand side. But if you look on the left-hand side and we look at Stonehenge, you'll see that Stonehenge has exactly the same 2 little circles, the 2 little circles we saw on the plan view of Stonehenge. And they appear to be marking the precession of the equinox of the Earth. And they're pretty much in exactly the same sort of angle as the angle of the Earth. So the angle of the Earth at present is 23.5 degrees. Now, this precession, if that's what this is, if this is a precessional diagram drawn in this, megalithic earthwork at Stonehenge, they give the angle of obliquity at 22.5 degrees. Not quite the same, 1 degree difference. Now, that's interesting because that might be able to date
Stonehenge for us, because of course the angle of obliquity changes over a 40,000 year cycle. And we have measured that cycle and we know exactly what that cycle is. And so the Earth had an angle of obliquity of 22.5 degrees, as in the Stonehenge diagram, 30,000 years ago.
That is so ancient. That is, I mean, we know the wooden post holes, the pine post holes, are definitely around 10,000 years old.
Yes.
So, are you suggesting that this is kind of inkling? It could be 3 times as old as that?
Yes. Well, I was expecting, when I measured this, I was expecting 10,500 BC, of course, like most people would. And of course, I looked it up on it. All this has been plotted by, oh, I forget the name of the professor now. Anyway, you can find it all online, and it's all been plotted out for the previous. He's done 20 million years anyway of obliquity. He's gone back 20 million years and given the precise cycle of it. And of course, it wasn't 10,000 years ago. It's the other way. So 10,000 years in the future, it will be 22.5 degrees. But going back into the past, the closest we have is 30,000 years ago. And that sort of surprised me. So if that is what Stonehenge is trying to tell us, then it's indicating that Stonehenge is 30,000 years old. That was a bit of a shocker to me, but there we go.
That's going to be a shock to everybody listening to this. I think that is quite epic. So, but for now, just wanted to get into ancient Egypt. I also want to mention the fact that we have Ralph is going to be joining us at the Megalithomania conference on the 7th and 8th of May, and hopefully we're going to get into this kind of stuff into more depth, because this is just what Megalithomania is all about, trying to understand this very sophisticated nature of the ancients. So let's start chatting about Egypt. I mean, we found this fascinating introduction with Avebury and Stonehenge, but in Thoth book, Thoth, the Architect of the Universe, you discuss the idea that these sites, including the ones we've just looked at, but also the pyramids and others, they actually encode measurements linking these cultures up. Like you talk about the imperial measurements of Britain are based on the Giza pyramids, but now you've just pushed the date back potentially of Stonehenge. So which way round is it, and what kind of, is there a handful of these measurements you could like mention which are just mind-blowing and kind of sort of prove this theory?
Well, we didn't rediscover these measurements until the Elizabethan era, so we're talking 500 years ago. That's when the imperial measurement system was made, and so that, I think, it was a rediscovery. And if people don't know what I'm talking about, it's because there's a bit of an unmentionable about the Great Pyramid, and I don't know why this has not been highlighted by anyone else. The Great Pyramid has a very specific measurement system. It's using the royal cubit, which I call the Thoth cubit, and the measurement around the base is 1,760 cubits. And that's a very specific number because it's a pi number. It's based on the pi fractional equivalent of pi, which is 22/7. And if you multiply that by 40, this wonderful number 40 that is all over the Old Testament, then you get 280 and 880. So 280 high and 880 around the base. But of course, with the Great Pyramid, you have to multiply by 2 because it's not just pi, it's the formula for a circle. So it's 2 pi r. So you've got to multiply by 2. And therefore, you get 1,760 as being the perimeter length around the base of the Great Pyramid. Might sound like an unusual number to have, but Americans, you should know this if you're over in America, because you're still on the imperial system. And of course, the imperial mile is 1,760 yards. And so I think there's been a direct copy here. Someone, because this imperial system was only invented in the Elizabethan era, and that was just about the time when Egypt was being opened up again to the West. And, only 100 years later, Britain had gone over there in force. Well, France went over there in force first. And then, of course, the British followed, and it became definitely a part of sort of Western culture. And I think that some point in the mid to late 1500s, someone had been to Giza and they had found this measurement system, because we appear to be using it in the imperial system. So the imperial system is, and you have to ask yourself why we have such a crazy system. So we have a chain is 22 yards. That's the length of a cricket pitch. You don't play cricket in America, but there we go. Is 22 yards. A rod is 5.5 yards. Now, why would you have such an odd system as 5.5 for a measurement length? It's because it's a quarter of pi. So pi is 22 over 7. A quarter of 22 is 5.5. That's where it all came from. So the imperial system is based on pi, exactly the same as the Great Pyramid is based on pi. They follow one another. But as I say, I think we inherited that. So the Great Pyramid was based upon pi, and that could have been built at any time in the distant past. So that could have been built 10,000 years ago. It could have been 30,000 years ago, and just sitting there on the Giza Plateau and encoding that information for later mathematicians, astronomers to have a look at and actually measure and discover. And I think that's what happened. So it's rather like Josephus Flavius says, this is where my megalithic material and my religious material all starts to dovetail, because Josephus Flavius said that there were two pillars made in the distant past. One was made of brick and the other was made of stone, and they encoded the knowledge of mankind. And that's sort of what we're seeing with the pyramids and maybe the ziggurats in Babylon or whatever as well, one made of brick, one made of stone, and they're encoding information, because the Great Pyramid is a pi pyramid. The second pyramid is a Pythagorean pyramid. It's 3, 4, 5. And if you go down to Dashur and have a look at the Red Pyramid, that's a 20, 21, 29 Pythagorean pyramid again. So all of these pyramids are encoding definite aspects of mathematics and astronomy and various other things as well.
And do you think the pyramids then were like part of their purpose was to actually be like a library of information in stone?
Yes. Yes, it's like the idea of a hall of records, but this is only part of the hall of records. I think there is another hall of records elsewhere, but it's encoding information. It's encoding knowledge to tell you how much they understood, how much the architects, the designers of these megalithic monuments understood. Like Stonehenge and Avebury, it's saying to anyone who looks at these monuments, hey, I knew the form and shape of the earth. That's how much knowledge I used to know 10,000 years ago, 30,000, whenever these megaliths were built. It's more than just signing your name on a piece of stone. It's saying, this is what I knew in this era. And it's an awful lot more than you give us credit for, basically.
Well, it was quite convenient. They did it in huge lumps of stone, which are impossible.
That's why they did it, yes. Yeah. That's why the megaliths are megaliths. It was designed. And that's how we know that these monuments were designed to last, for 100,000 years minimum, if we hadn't have started playing around with them and digging them up. So this message was designed to last for millennia, 50,000 years, 100,000 years. That was the intent of the designer. And so this wasn't just any old monument just built as a tomb. This was a message for the future. for the distant future.
It's almost like these, this placing this tomb theory onto sites such as the Great Pyramid and many other sites. It just takes away this kind of what we're talking about. It takes away this yearning and this intention to study what's actually right in front of us, because a lot of people nowadays, they're not into maths, they're not into geometry, they're not into pi and understanding geodesy or astronomy. These are really things we're not taught anymore, but I think obviously in ancient times excuse me, that was a different matter. And so I think people need to look again at like numbers and like how important this is within these sites. And actually that is, the language of the ancients, the way they conveyed messages through time, which can't, you can't mistranslate numbers very easily, whereas you can mistranslate hieroglyphs and lost languages. So I find that, it's like the universal constant.
It is maths. Yeah. Maths is the universal language. It's visible for any culture in any era. It won't change. It'll be exactly the same.
So this one looks very, very complicated. What can you tell us about this?
Yes, and the partner of this is even more complicated because it has the Queen's Chamber underneath it. But anyway, this was just remeasuring the pyramids in not just Thoth cubits, the royal cubit, but in the what I called the Thoth rod, which is 5.5 cubits. So I think that these pyramids were all designed in Thoth rods, basically, measuring 5.5 cubits each. And yes, most of the items within the pyramids all agree with this being a pi pyramid, that it was based on 22/7, the pi fractional. And so this is just demonstrating that most of the internal components, you can see here the King's Chamber and the shafts that come out of the King's Chamber, are all definite designed artifacts. They're not just sort of random shafts and chambers that are just put in any particular position within the pyramid. They were actually designed to be at specific locations, and there was a good reason for that. So that was interesting that they all sort of married up to this idea that this was a pi pyramid.
You have this, you sent over this as well. You talk about like specific locations of the design of the pyramid, but you talk about locations on the planet are encoded into this design. You sent us this graphic here, which is absolutely fascinating. Which we've got two of these actually, but this just shows you the kind of the area above the King's Chamber turned upside down. We've also got this one as well, which kind of is another map. But if we start with this one, you could like describe what's going on here.
Yes, well, the question then becomes, why do we have all of these chambers in these pyramids? Because these pyramids were not tombs, as you said. No pharaoh in his right mind would be buried in a tomb that didn't glorify his name and didn't have, the Book of the Dead inscribed all over it. So we know that these chambers were not tombs. So what are they? They were definitely very important. I mean, they were made in huge, great slabs of granite, which is very, very difficult to get up such a huge mass of the Great Pyramid. So they were hugely important. But why were they there in specific locations? And then why above the King's Chamber, we have all of these smaller chambers? Obviously, on this diagram, they're upside down, but these are known as the relieving chambers. And they serve absolutely no purpose. They called them relieving chambers because they thought they were relieving stresses on the top of the King's Chamber. But of course, they're doing no such thing. All they're doing is holding up the mass of air that's above them, which is, probably about 1 kilo maybe. You might as well have put the roof, the angled roof of the chamber above the first ceiling. But they didn't. They added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these ceilings above the King's Chamber for no good reason. And so that took a long time to discover what it was. And I actually discovered it because I had the diagram sitting upside down on my wall because it turned itself upside down. And I was sitting there looking at this thinking, hold on a minute. If Avery can be giving us an image of the Earth floating in space, then surely the Great Pyramid might be giving us something that's more complex. And it just struck me that these chambers were looking very, very similar to the continents of the Earth. And this is one of those continents. And it gives you the sort of shape of Africa. But more than that, it gives you the lines of latitude that are associated with Africa as well. So now we have a rationale for why we have these relieving chambers. They're not just ridiculous items attached to the top of the king's chamber. Each one of them gives a line of latitude, well, a line of 10 degrees of latitude. And so we go all the way from 30 north to 30 south on Africa, and then capped at the base there, obviously up the other way it will be on top, with the angled roof beams of the chamber. And so we have a complete image, as it were, of Africa being drawn in megalithic stone. And if we go back to the full image of all of the chambers in the King's Chamber, sorry, in the Great Pyramid, the other one going the other way, that one, we see that the other chambers in the Great Pyramid might be indicating parts, continents of the Earth as well. So we have this massive great chamber that leads up to the King's Chamber. It's the Grand Gallery, and it's a pathway that runs up towards the King's Chamber, but it's got this roof that is, I don't know what it is actually. It's probably about 30 cubits, 15 meters high. Anyway, it's an enormous great gallery that runs up towards the King's Chamber, and it has absolutely no rational reason for it being there. Lots of people have speculated why it's there. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to actually design and build into your pyramid, and yet it seems to have no reason for it being there. But of course, if it's taken in profile like this, and you look at it as being the continents of the Earth, well, it's indicating that it's the whole of Asia. And then the little antechamber, which is just there before you get to the King's Chamber, is the Arabias before you get to the continent of Africa. And so, like Avebury, which is giving you an image of the Earth, here in the Great Pyramid, we're getting an image of the continents of the Earth, a very detailed image of the continents of the Earth. And again, there's only one reason for doing that. It's the designer is showing off the amount of knowledge and information they had in this era. It's saying, look, we knew the form and shape of the Earth. And the other reason why you might want to do that is because, well, you have a map here. And what do you do with maps? You mark something on it. And so what we could have here is a sort of X marks the spot. If you have a map, then maybe we're marking something upon that map. And that was something I went looking for in the next book, which was called K2 Quest of the Gods. So yeah, I think they were actually marking something on this map. So we have a map, put an X on it, and you can go and have a look there and see what you find.
So this K2 book, this is the theory that, based upon the work you were doing here, then you believe you found maybe the Hall of Records isn't in Egypt, it's somewhere completely different. I mean,
yes.
I mean, because you went out there as well, didn't you? You went out.
I did, because the rationale was because everyone was looking for a Hall of Records. I'm not entirely sure how old this idea is for a Hall of Records, But there was always some idea that there was some knowledge that had been stored from the ancient times, sort of like a Library of Alexandria that had been buried somewhere, and you could go and discover it. But it always struck me that you would never, if there was such a place, you would never place it on the Giza Plateau or someone, in the Nile Delta, where someone digging a well would go and find it just digging a well. You would want it to be in a more sort of secure location than that. And of course, if you have an image of all of the continents of the Earth, then you can put it somewhere much more remote and much more secure. And that brings us on. I don't know if I put it on there, the star shaft pointing diagram. I think it was the last diagram in the list. Because, oh, that's the door. We could talk about that before we go on to. So the door of the Great Pyramid is interesting because it was always known that there was a door. Strabo tells us about it. 2nd century BC, he describes the door, and this is my diagram based on what Strabo said. So the entrance to the Great Pyramid was always known about. So in which case, why do we have that tunnel that was dug? They call it the Al-Mamun tunnel that is dug into the side of the pyramid. Why do we have that tunnel going bodily into the side of the pyramid when the entrance was already known? The reason, I think, is because that Al-Mamun tunnel was not dug into the pyramid to go and find the chambers. It was dug out of the pyramid in order to get something out. Because there's a problem. If you have something that you found in one of the chambers, the Queen's chamber or the King's chamber, there is no way you could get it out because it has to go round the join between the ascending and descending passages. And it's not possible to do that. And anything of length, like a sarcophagus or whatever, will happen to be there, you cannot get it out of the pyramid. The only way you can do that is to dig another tunnel out of the pyramid yourself. And that's exactly what Al-Mamun did. And so the Al-Mamun tunnel was to get something out of the pyramid that they had found in one of the chambers. But of course, we don't know what they found. There is no record of that. But there would be no point in digging that tunnel for any other reason, because everybody knew where the entrance to the Great Pyramid was. It was just above the Al-Mamun tunnel.
And so this was like a hidden entrance. So you got this image here.
You got this stone on the front. Yep.
So that would hide it pretty much. So you wouldn't be able to see it.
Could do, but of course, from history, Strabo knew about it. Moses knew about it because. Should we go into one of the secrets of the Old Testament?
Yeah.
Why not? The secret of the Old Testament is how on earth did the Israelites lose their sacred mountain? So the Israelites were consummate chroniclers. They chronicled everything. And yet somehow they lost the position of Mount Sinai. How on earth did they manage to do that? Well, they didn't. They never did lose it. And so to re-find Mount Sinai, what you have to do is look at the attributes of it. And so Mount Sinai is the largest mountain in the area. It's sharp and difficult to climb. It's on the edge of a desert. It has a cave inside it where God lived, where Moses went up to go and see God. And it's small. It might be a large mountain, but it's small enough that you can cordon it off at the bottom because you weren't allowed to touch it. So you could put a fence around the bottom of it. And the other thing was at the bottom of it, there was a black, smooth pavement that looked like the night sky. Now, where do we find such a mountain? Well, we're looking at it here. Mount Sinai is the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is the tallest pyramid. in the whole of Egypt. It's sharp and difficult to climb. It's on the edge of a desert. It does have a cave inside it. That cave was always open, so the entrance to the pyramid was always open. You could go down to the bottom of the pyramid. It's not shown on this diagram, but anyway, there's a rough cave at the bottom of the Great Pyramid. And of course, if you go on the eastern side of the Great Pyramid, you will find the black basalt pavement that was smooth and looked like the night sky. So I don't have a picture of it here. I have another one actually, so I could attach another picture at another time.
What are these? What are these then? We're also looking at, because
this is the erosion. This is another way we can date the pyramids. So we had this big discussion, of course, in the 90s and beyond, with Robert Schoch and John Anthony West and various other people about the erosion patterns on the Sphinx enclosure. And indeed, they are right. There's quite a lot of erosion, water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure. The trouble is with the Sphinx enclosure is you've got nothing really to compare it with. And so it's very difficult to give yourself a definite date. But I thought, well, why not look at a definite erosion pattern, a differential erosion pattern? So what we have here is the original base of the Great Pyramid before they stripped off the casing stones. And as it happens, they put the casing stones on top of a pavement. And this is the pavement they put the casing stones on. And the line you see running down here is where the casing stones used to be. So on the right, there were casing stones. On the left, it was always open, to the weather, to the rain, to the feet of pilgrims, whoever was walking there, and it was eroding away. And the right was always covered up. And then someone came along about 1,000 years ago and stole the casing blocks, which were made of nice, pure white Tura limestone. And so what we have is a differential. So on the right-hand side, the erosion is 1,000 years. And on the left-hand side, the erosion is at least 10 times more. And so if the right side is 1,000 years, then the left side must be at least 10,000 years. And so we can get a sort of rough estimate of the age of the pyramid from this dual erosion. And that the next image probably gives another image of this dual erosion. And here we go again. So the right side was covered by the casing blocks. The left side was always open to the atmosphere and to the feet of pilgrims. And you see there's a definite line again. And if you measure the difference in erosion, again, we get at least 10 times more erosion on the left than the right. And again, that's indicating that the Great Pyramid is at least 10,000 years old. And you can do the same down at Dashur as well. We get the same. Oh, there we go. Here's we've got a little image of how we do this. So left side, we have the pyramid with its cladding stones on, and the base is eroding. And note, of course, that that pavement stone at the bottom is one block. It's not a difference between two blocks. It's one piece of stone that's been eroding over a different amount of time. So on the left, we have erosion always happening on that little ledge coming out from the bottom of the pyramid. And then someone steals on the right side, someone steals the cladding stones. And now we get erosion on both sides of that pavement stone at the bottom. And as I say, the erosion differential is at least 10 times between the two. And since we know when the casing blocks were stolen, roughly, during the Muslim era, about 10,000 years ago, then we can estimate that the pyramid was at least 10,000 years old, maybe much older, because some of the erosion is much, much greater where the pavement block was always exposed. And on the next picture, I think is the side of the pyramid as well. We can get the same idea. We get some, here's the side of a pyramid. This is the bent pyramid down at Dashur, and it still has its casing blocks on, and they are, well, they don't look like it here, but if they were cleaned up, they are bright white Tura limestone, really high quality limestone. However, if you have a look at all of the little ovals I've put all over this, you will see that someone has repaired it. So all over this pyramid, from bottom to top on all four sides, someone has been around this pyramid and chiseled out any little bits of casing stone that were decaying, being eroded, and they've put a new piece of stone in there. So someone has put scaffolding over the whole of this pyramid and repaired it. When was that done? And here's another piece. Again, you can see all of these repair blocks that have been put into the side of the pyramid. And the question is, when was this done? Because it's not been done in recorded history. We have no information on someone repairing this pyramid. And how soon after a pyramid is built would you need to repair it? I mean, surely it would be thousands of years before it would need repairing. This is fine Tura limestone. This is really durable stuff. You can see from the blocks here that have not been repaired that many of these blocks are in almost sort of perfect condition since the time the pyramid was built. And of course, stone is not uniform. You know, some blocks will be stronger than others. Some will have inclusions or fractures in them, and so they need repairing. But it would be thousands of years after the pyramid was constructed that it would need repairing. So when was this done? Well, this pyramid is only really associated with one particular pharaoh, and that was Snorfru or Snefru, old dynasty. So we're talking, I don't know when he was around. It's about 2,400 years ago. Anyway, sorry, 2,400 BC, 4,400 years ago. And he's the pharaoh that's associated with this particular pyramid. But I'm pretty sure that these pyramids can last 4,000 years without needing repairing. So perhaps Snorfru didn't build this pyramid. Perhaps he repaired it. And if he did, then we could estimate that this pyramid was built at least twice as much time passed before it needed repairing by Snorfru. So if he's 4,500 years ago, then this pyramid must be at least 9,000 years old before it needed repairing by Snorfru after 4,000 years of existence. And he repaired it 4,000 odd years ago. And now we see it in this condition now, with the repair blocks being put in 4,000 years ago and the rest of the pyramid being some 9,000 at least years old, depending on how much, how quickly you think these blocks eroded themselves.
Isn't this the same as like on the Giza Plateau, where there's a theory that Khafre, like the second pyramid, did a repair job? I mean, because we find a lot of granite. We find a lot of granite on the middle pyramid and the small pyramid, and they appear to be kind of later. It's almost like, and that's very similar in style to the Valley Temple as well, where the statues of this particular pharaoh were found, which is, but it seems there was a much older limestone construction, that was the Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple, obviously, and also around the pyramids as well. And so one of the theories that I've read a lot about is that the same thing you're talking about with this one was applied on the Giza Plateau. Do you think that's the case, and these are actually all much older?
Oh, I'm sure, because we have the same on the Sphinx. We have this wonderful Sphinx, which was supposed to be built in the Old Kingdom era, but we have Old Kingdom repairs on the Sphinx body. Now, why would they having to be repairing the Sphinx when they'd only just made it? It rather again suggests that repairs were done during the Old Kingdom because the Sphinx was much, much older than that. And of course, if the Sphinx was looking at the processional rise of Leo, as many people have suggested, then that would have been 10,500 BC. And that would equate with Old Kingdom pharaohs having to repair it in 2,500 BC. So again, yes, that would point in the same direction. And any repairs that were done to the Khafre Great Pyramids.
Okay, that's fantastic. So yeah, so this is we're talking about some of the themes from Thoth, Architect of the Universe, and other parts of Ralph's books here. But I wanted to sort of change direction a little bit, Ralph, and maybe we could have a little look at something that fascinates me, and this is the story of Scota, or Scota.
Yes.
And because not only are we finding this fascinating story within Egypt itself, but there's an expanded story connecting with Britain again. So not only do we have the measurements and the connections possibly with Stonehenge and Avebury and things like this, but also I'm fascinated by this story from the Scota Chronicon. We actually wrote about this in one of Jim's recent book, because there's a story that was recorded in this ancient Scottish document that says that the Queen Scota from Egypt made her way via other places and settled and even founded Scotland, and ended up in Ireland, being buried there. So can you give us a little update on that, about a rough outline of that story?
Yes, I read about this many years ago, and I thought the book I read didn't really do the information justice, and so I took a deeper dive into this and had and I actually followed the information around. I toured around all of the locations where I think they went to. And the interesting aspect is that, yes, this is recorded in Scota Chronicon, which is from the 14th century. So it's quite old in Scotland. It's the ancient history of Scotland. But it's also taken from the Labor Gabala, which is 6th century in Ireland. And so we're going back a long way into the, dark, deep recesses of history here, that someone recorded that was an exile from Egypt that ended up in Ireland and Scotland. And that's interesting on its own. And of course, it's always taken as mythology. But if you read Scota Chronicon, it's quite apparent that there's a lot of information there. And so the first thing that sticks out is that it was Walter Boer, I think, wrote it. He had a copy of Manetho. Manetho is the 3rd century BC historian from Egypt, who wrote, and he virtually made the chronology that we have today for all of the pharaohs. That all of that chronology comes from Manetho, with various additions and modifications. Well, whoever wrote Scota Chronicon had the works of Manetho, because they follow his chronology. And the other interesting thing that I saw was it gives information about pharaohs who had been deleted from history. So it gives, it records the life of Akhenaten, who had been deleted from Egyptian history. And it appears that the people who were exiled, and they're given as Queen Scota and King Gaithalos, were actually Pharaoh I and Queen Ankhesenamun of the Amarna dynasty. And that makes sense, because we don't have many occasions within Egyptian history when a pharaoh would have been kicked out. Doesn't happen very often. And somehow these, Irish and Scottish chroniclers knew that there was a possible exile out of Egypt during the Amarna era. And that's exactly what happened, because, of course, Akhenaten and Nefertiti go missing. People say they died at Amarna, but there's no evidence whatsoever that they died at Amarna. And then later on, I and Ankhesenamun also go missing. So we have Pharaoh Akhenaten, and then a couple of minor pharaohs, which might have been Nefertiti. And then we go to King or Pharaoh Tutankhamun, who everybody knows about. And then we jump to Pharaoh I, and he was the next pharaoh after Tutankhamun. And I say they're related. I say that Tutankhamun might have been the son of Pharaoh I, because I don't think he was the son of Akhenaten. And so I became Pharaoh. He married the widow of Tutankhamun, Ankhesenamun, and he only lasted, I think it was about 4 years. And then he was, well, I say, and Scotty Chronicon says, he was kicked out of Egypt. Again, people will say that I died in Egypt, but there is no evidence whatsoever that I and Ankhesenamun died in Egypt. I think they went on this exodus, which is just what Scotty Chronicon records. And it wasn't they weren't just chased out of Egypt. This is a little like often happens. I think the same happened with Akhenaten as well. They were advised to leave and make their way elsewhere because they were gods. They were very difficult people to kill. It was very difficult to kill a pharaoh. And so they just, politely told them, go, organize an exile, and off you go. And they were given 60 ships. So it was quite a large fleet. So I guesstimate you could have about 1,000 people on these ships. Load up with all of the stores you require, and off you go. And they sailed off into the sunset, heading west, and they ended up in the Ebro Peninsula, which is on the east coast of Spain. And I think they went there. I don't know if they had prior information about Ebro, but Ebro is the same as Egypt. It's a delta. Instead of being the Nile Delta, it's the Ebro Delta. So, any farmers with them on that party would have known exactly how to farm that land. It's exactly the same as the Nile Delta. And they were there for a number of generations, but they were always constantly being attacked. So they went to the Balearic Islands, Majorca and Minorca, and we have evidence. I follow the evidence through because there are very similar sort of monuments in these different locations. And so we get upturned boat monuments in Minorca, which are exactly the same as we get in Ireland as well. And so they were there for a number of generations, and then they decided to go west again, and they went round the coast and ended up on the Dingle Peninsula in Ireland. And then later they went to Scotland, because at that time Ireland was called Scotia. That's where the name for Ireland came from. And that's why, Scotland and Spain have the same name. One is called Hibernia, the other is called Hiberia. And so these exiles ended up in Ireland, on the west coast of Ireland. And they went there because they knew it was pretty much uninhabited. So while they were always being constantly hassled in Spain, they could have Ireland to themselves, basically. And they formed the basis of the Irish population. And that may be why we have a strong strand of ginger in Ireland and Scotland, because most of these pharaohs were ginger. So, and people don't seem to know that very much. It's not spoken about very often, but the mummy of Yuya, who is the father or the patriarch, as it were, of the Amarna dynasty of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, he is ginger, bright ginger. And you can see that on his mummy. And then Pharaoh Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great. Now his, and this sort of proves what the coloring is. His mummy was taken to Paris in 1986, I think it was, because his mummy was decaying. It had some bugs in it. And so they took it to the forensic labs in Paris for preservation. And while it was there, Professor Kilcaldy did a full investigation of his mummy. And he determined that he was a pale-skinned man with wavy ginger hair. And that ginger hair has nothing to do with the mummification process, because it's an entirely different chemical. And if you look at the mummy of Ramesses II, he was ginger. And so we have this strand of ginger now going with Scotty Chronicon, ending up in Ireland and Scotland. And this would have been, well, they escaped from Egypt in about 1320 BC. So this is quite a long time ago. This is, before the Iron Age. This is Bronze Age era. And they would have probably gone round to Ireland maybe 1000 BC or something of that nature. So again, quite a long time ago, before recorded history in Britain. And they populated the west coast of Ireland and Britain. So it's an interesting story, and I find quite a lot of correspondence that sort of demonstrates that this exile is probably true.
In Ireland itself, there's a grave site which is said to be the grave of Scota or Scota, and I think that's in the northern kind of area, and people, and apparently it's marked as a grave, or it's become like this kind of legend. I mean, what do you know about that? And also the fact that in Ireland and in other parts of Britain, actually in Wales, in like the Mold, in the Mold area, Flintshire, plus I think down in Cornwall, they found these faience beads, which are very specifically an Egyptian design. Can you talk a little bit about her gravesite and the fact that there's, like, with these beads, there's evidence of Egyptian connections?
Yes, there are quite a few Egyptian connections. The tomb of Scota is on the Dingle Peninsula, so that's on the west coast of Ireland. It's not marked very well. I had to search for it. I took a whole day searching for it with the help of the chief librarian in Dingle. And it's actually an outcrop of rock. So, and it's right by a stream. It's not where you'd want to put a grave. So I don't think that is the tomb of Scota. But anyway, on the Dingle Peninsula, you do find a lot of interesting artifacts which are similar. So we have the upturned boat tombs or churches, whatever they were used for, which are exactly the same as the ones on the Balearic Islands. And we have these, they call them, what do they call them? They call them fortresses. They have these big fortresses up and down the west coast of Ireland, but especially on the Dingle Peninsula. And they're not actually fortresses. They're actually theatres. And that sort of changes the whole dynamics of the population that were there. If you say it's a fortress, you've got this petrified population, protecting themselves against some unknown enemies, hiding behind this big fortress. But if you say it's a theatre, because it looks like a theatre, it has terraces going up the side, I say it's a theatre for many reasons. Well, now you have a population who's confident, open, having these big theatrical displays. And one of the things that we have at the center of these theaters is round towers. And you have exactly the same round towers on Minorca and Majorca, and you have them in Ireland as well, and you get them in Scotland. So we have this tradition of these funny old round towers, which I think are sort of like phallic symbols, as some sort of like a what am I thinking? Not a stela, an obelisk, like having an obelisk, like Mary Magdalene was the Mary of the Tower, of course. And we have these faience beads, as you say, which are typically, they came from Egypt, so they're glass basically, and they're man-made. And that sort of man-made artifact was not being made in Ireland, of course. They had to have come from elsewhere. And of course, one of the places they could have come from is on this exile from Egypt. Now, if they'd gone along with 60 boats, they would have taken as much goods as they possibly could, things they could trade, things they needed. And we know exactly what they took, because we have the ship, I can never pronounce this name, it's the Olaloon wreck, which is on the southwest coast of modern Turkey at Bodrum. And they found a wreck off the coast there, which was loaded with everything you would need to start a new civilization. And they say it's a trading boat, but I'm not entirely sure it's a trading boat, because it's not carrying one good. It's carrying everything you would need for a civilization. And of course, we know when this boat sank, well, we have a good idea because it carried a signet ring from Nefertiti. So it's the same era. And this could have been exactly what these people were carrying on their boat, which was everything you needed for a civilization, including fish hooks and all of this sort of stuff, everything you would require. Glass ingots for making glass, copper ingots for making copper, bronze, everything you would require was on this ship. And of course, if they had gone round to Ireland, they would have had all of this goods they could have traded. Faience beads and gold necklaces. And of course, we have this real conundrum in Ireland that the central thing, if you go to the Dublin Museum, it's a great museum, actually. It's for a provincial museum, it's really good. And one of the central elements we have are these gold necklaces, golden torques, they're known as, which could not have been made in Ireland. Ireland doesn't have that type of gold. It doesn't have enough gold. They didn't have the technology. There is no evidence of smelting gold in Ireland. It had to have been imported. And how could Ireland, which was, typically sort of poverty-stricken, import such expensive items? Well, of course, if they'd come on an exile with the Queen Scota and King Gaithalos, then we know how those necklaces got there. And of course, within the Amarna era, the main element of trade within the Amarna era was golden necklaces. If you were a confidant of the king, if you were working well, etc., you were rewarded with a gold necklace. And that's exactly what we find in Ireland. And so, yes, you mentioned mold. We have this mold golden cape. Now, mold is on North Wales. It's just across the coast there from Ireland. And they found this golden cape, which again is from this Bronze Age era. And it's exactly the same as the golden capes they used to put on the, not so much the mummies, but on the Shabati, I think they're called, the small effigies of the pharaohs, and the canopic jars. So when you mummified someone, their internal organs were put into canopic jars within the tomb, and they have little heads on them, like a king or a queen, and they wear the ones from Amarna, from the tomb of Tutankhamun, wear exactly the same cape as the mold cape. It's identical. I'm sure that's where it came from. So how did an Egyptian gold cape end up in mold in northern Wales? It's not something that would have been traded, I don't think. It's a vastly expensive item. But it could have come, of course, with an exile of some Egyptians to Ireland.
It's incredible. I mean, this whole story fascinates me, and I think it's so important that these old stories, these legends, these old documents, and this is what you do. People need to look at these and not rely on the current version of history. And I think you mentioned that in your new book, was it Shards of Illumination, where you're kind of you're kind of accessing these older documents, these old stories, these other things, and the modern version of history is just all a bit wrong. It's all just gone wrong. It's kind of written down in such a way that it doesn't go, I know, for instance, in Wales, they changed the whole curriculum, removing all the old stories back in the early 1900s and pushing in this agenda to, delete that and make it like a joke that all these stories that have been around for thousands of years were not correct, like Troy and Brutus and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, maybe you could, mention your new book and how this fits in with that.
Yes, they've given mythology a bad name, so it's become mythology. And I don't believe mythology is mythology. Too often I've found a grain of truth in the middle of mythology. So I think a lot of mythology is ancient history that's just been it's had what do you call it, Chinese whispers and so on. But at the core of it, I think a lot of it is real history, and so it should be taught so we remember this, even if it's only taught as a separate subject. But just to always dismiss it, I think, is to dismiss a lot of our ancient past, especially with things like Arthurian legend. I've got a book on King Arthur, which is very different. And the number of mythologies within Arthurian legend, which are most probably true, is amazing, because it comes up with some crazy things that you wouldn't believe within Arthurian legend. It gives the history of Pompey the Great. What's that got to do with Arthurian legend? And it's a true history of Pompey the Great. It gives the history of the floating islands of the Mediterranean. What are the floating islands? Well, the floating islands are what came off Santorini when Santorini blew up in 1600 BC. And Arthurian legend knows about it. It gives the history of Hippocrates in Rome with Emperor Augustus. What's that got to do with Arthurian legend? But I think it's true. What it's actually saying with this story of Hippocrates in Rome is probably true. So all these strange stories, which people would probably dismiss, have a kernel of truth within them, which is why I think things like Scotichronicon should be studied a little more seriously, rather than just dismissing it. Well, okay, give the Orthodox history, but just tell the tale on one side at least, and say, well, this is what they thought, back in the 14th century or the 6th century. This is what they thought was the history of Scotland. Because I think there's more than a grain of truth in Scotichronicon. And regards my new book, it's quite a big one again. A lot of my books are rather big. So King Jesus is about 500 pages. Jesus, King of Edessa, is about nearly 600. The Grail Cipher, which is obviously the Arthurian one, is about 600 pages. And the latest one is Shards of Illumination, and that's again 600 pages. And what I thought I'd do with that one was go through all the questions I've been asked over the last 5 years. So it's going back over the last 5 years. I've been asked lots of questions. I've written lots of answers to all of these questions, obviously questioning me about my works and so on, what I've declared. And given further explanation, because obviously if people are asking questions about that particular topic, then maybe I didn't explain it well enough in the first place in the original book. So I go through it again and again and try and explain it as best as I can. So it's quite an interesting book that jumps around from topic to topic all over the place. So within Shards, I think I've got nearly 400 questions and 400 answers on all sorts of topics. And I go into other things that people have been asking as well. So I do ancient history, theology, of course, academia, lots of questions on academia, all sorts of different questions. What else do I do? Anyway, there's a whole range of topics in that book. So it's quite interesting. It's a sort of book you can dip into and dip out of, on every page is different.
Fantastic, brilliant. All right, well, Ralph, I think we'll tie this up today. We could go on. I know we could go on. Maybe we'll do this again, and we'll get into some other subjects when JJ Ainsworth could join us, because I think she's been following your work for years as well. So maybe another time we can go a bit deeper. But we're delighted you could join us, and I do recommend people check out Ralph's website, Edfu Books. I mean, what is the exact website, please?
It's edfu-books.com. So edfu is edfu-books. And I'm not very active on there at present, but I do an awful lot of posting on Facebook. So my Facebook is ralphellis.144. And you can pick me up there, and there's quite a few discussions on that.
And also, Ralph has got a series of articles on ancient-origins.net and on the members area as well. And so, yeah, you can catch up with him there. So and there's the
YouTube channel as well. So I've got a YouTube channel. It's not easy to find. If you dial in my name and something like, I don't know, Jesus, Arthur, and various other things, and then look for a thumbnail with a red and gold phoenix, and that will be my channel.
We'll put the link in as well.
Okay, because it doesn't come up if you search for it on Google. It often doesn't come up.
We'll put all the links below anyway. So thanks so much, Ralph. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I've always been fascinated by the research you did from Thoth, Architect of the Universe. I'm personally fascinated by like the whole geometry, mathematics, and the sort of planetary kind of connections that we seem to find. So there's a lot to think about here, and I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Thanks a lot, Megalithomaniacs. We appreciate your support. Please check out Ralph's work. Once again, take care, Megalithomaniacs. Thanks again, Ralph, and we'll see you soon.